Hi, this is Pastor Jim. It's good to be with you again for our next installment of Homeschool for the Soul. We're talking about different spiritual disciplines for the quarantine life. And today we want to talk about how you worship in your home. Worship is not just something that happens on Sunday mornings, and it's not just something that happens in a church building. It should happen every single day of our lives. But I know for some people that's a new concept, so we want to talk about what it might be like to worship in your home.
Because you might think, well, church, how do I have church? I don't have the right seating. I don't have a lit up cross. I don't have stained glass windows. That's actually okay. Lots of church gatherings around the world don't have those things. And for a lot of existence of the early church, they didn't have those things as well. But you do need to be intentional about your space. As you think about where you're going to spend time in worship, consider what things are in that environment that could distract you. It's okay for this season to maybe even choose a place in your home. Maybe it's in your backyard that feels worshipful for you, and consider what it looks like to eliminate distractions from that space. Maybe when you decide to sit down and worship, you don't bring your cell phone into that space. Maybe you make sure you don't have an open window that you can see outside and get distracted by the things walking by. Especially if you are experiencing a worship service online, you're probably going to want to make sure that you are away from distractions, text messages that could come through, notifications that can come through. Because in church, not that anyone ever does this, but if you get a text in church, the pastor keeps going, and you can look at it and be fine. But if you're worshiping and watching a service on your mobile device and you still have those push notifications coming through, that's a really easy way to get pulled out, and we're going to keep going, and you're going to feel left behind. So just make sure you eliminate distractions. Make sure you think through where you're going to sit. It is okay to find some kind of iconography, a cross of sorts that you want to put up in an area. That's okay. If you don't have one, though, also okay. Just be intentional about your space. Eliminate distractions. That is kind of that first step into worshiping at home.
There you go. You want to make sure you have a Bible handy. I'd recommend a paper copy if you've got one. You can watch it digitally, but turn off the push notifications because you don't want to get pulled out of that. If you're studying the Bible yourself, outside of the worship services that we're viewing together online, I'd recommend a couple things. One, if you've never read the Bible before, if you're new to it, if you're just immersing yourself in it for the first time, read one of the Gospels. Those are the 4 biographies of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And if you don't have one of those under your belt, you definitely want to read one of those first. It makes no sense at all to call yourself a follower of a guy whose story you've never read. So make sure you read a gospel first and get to know the story of Jesus. You might be ambitious and say, I'm going to read the whole Bible in a year. That's great. It only takes 3 chapters a day. But whatever else, start with the story of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Then on Sundays, when we do cast our worship services from our church to your living room, have a Bible with you, and we'll read a passage together each Sunday and study what that has to say.
And one of the things I'm thinking through, Jim, is in the home I grew up in, though it was before the internet, if I tried to carve out space to engage with the Bible or prayer at home, like I didn't grow up in a Christian family. And you might go, well, my family isn't a Christian family, or there are people in my family that don't follow Jesus, and you might wonder, does this still apply to me? And I would just encourage you to say, yes, absolutely. As I talk with my parents now, who were not Christians when I was in the home and are Christians now, like they'll point back to the fact that there was a Christian in the house reading the Bible that was significant for them in their story. And so as much as you can, see this season of doing church at home as an evangelism opportunity to not necessarily do all of the seed planting and the growing and the harvesting yourself, but instead just be faithful in the things that you've been called to. And in that faithfulness, you may show that spouse or that sibling or that parent that church isn't just something we go to a building to do. Church is something we are. And that following Jesus is something we can do anywhere we are. And so being faithful in reading the Bible, being faithful in prayer, being faithful in worship are things that can tell an amazing story to those in your family who might not yet be believers. But your faith in seasons like this might be, the thing that compels them to ask questions. And it might not happen now. It might happen way later. So be faithful now and trust God with the later.
That's good. That's good. And it's good, as you say, for people just to see you practicing your own faith. It carries a lot more weight than you nagging them about their lack of faith. You're probably not going to lead somebody to Jesus by harassing them. So you practicing your faith in the home is a great witness. And you don't have to be heavy-handed in trying to impose that on other people. Just let them see you practicing the disciplines of worship in your house. I want to make sure that we know how to pray, because we talk about prayer a lot. We talk about prayer pretty loosely. For some people, it comes really easily. But for some people, it's still a bit of a foreign concept. They don't know quite what's going on when they pray. I remember a story about a guy who went to visit somebody in the hospital bed, and the guy in the hospital bed was dying. And he said, I don't know how to pray. What do I do? And the man said, well, you just picture Jesus sitting next to you, and you talk to him as though you were talking to a friend, the way you're talking to me right now. Just talk to him about whatever's on your heart. In fact, you could pull up an empty chair next to the bed and just picture him sitting in the chair and talk to him as though he's sitting there. A few weeks later, the man passed away, and his wife called this guy who had gone to visit her husband in the hospital, and she said the strangest thing happened. When he passed away, he sat up and he leaned over and he put his head in the seat of an empty chair. And I just picture this guy imagining Jesus sitting next to him and listening to him talk like a friend. That's who Jesus is, and he wants to be your friend, and he wants to talk to you like a friend. And so it starts with you just beginning to address him on a daily basis the way you and I would talk to each other. Just, hi, how you doing? Here's what's going on in my world. Here's what I'm worried about today. Here are my needs today. Here are the needs of my family and friends that I care about today. You can lay that all out in front of him. But then pause and just sit and think about who Jesus is. Contemplate who he is. Think about how much he loves you. Stop and listen and let him speak into your heart. And sometimes you'll hear just little phrases or ideas, or you'll see pictures that are the Holy Spirit speaking to you and letting you know what God has to say to you every day. God has a message of love for you every single day, and prayer is entering into that conversation to hear that message. So every single day, we as a church are going to pray together at 6:25 p.m. 6:25 p.m. because that is from
Matthew
6:25, which says, "Don't worry about your life. Don't worry about food. Don't worry about clothes. God knows what you need, and God will care for you." So let's practice that discipline of praying every day at 6:25, and then we'll continue to gather together as a big church on Sundays for worship. God bless you. Thanks for watching again, and we'll keep producing videos for our Homeschool for the Soul, and we hope it blesses you. God bless.